This weekend, NASCAR roars back to the streets of Chicago after the success of last year's race. It's honestly kind of crazy to think that the sport is actually going back after everything that went wrong last year. The one-year deal, 3-year option with the city was signed by the previous mayor who was so unpopular she lost in the primaries, and the sitting mayor wasn't too keen on a major motorsport encroaching on the downtown area. On top of pressure from the city, Chicago just so happened to be slammed with torrential rainfall. Most parts of the city, including the street course, saw standing water, with some parts reportedly getting upwards of 8 inches on Sunday alone. Because of the weather, all performing acts would cancel their shows, much to the frustration of potential new fans. With all eyes on them and the clock ticking, NASCAR got the track dry enough for wet weather tires, drivers on track, and the green flag was thrown for the sport's first ever street race. But wait, why is NASCAR racing on city streets? Why do the cars look like that?
Whose idea was this?
Let's take a step back. Most of my subscribers are people who are happily supporting my creative endeavors, but don't know as much about the sport as the average fan. You might think the classic stereotypes. Anybody who's been a long-term fan of the sport has had to endure this nonsense to some degree. Truth is, NASCAR's been turning left and right since its very origins on Daytona Beach. It was literally half public road and half beach, with the Atlantic Ocean right next to the racing surface. While the original Daytona Beach was more of a misshapen oval, NASCAR would visit other road courses as early as the 1950s at tracks like Road America in Wisconsin and Riverside in California. The sport would even try its hand at a road racing series with lighter cars in the mid-80s, though that would ultimately prove to be a failure. From 1989 to 2017, NASCAR's Cup Series only visited 2 road courses every year, Sonoma in California and Watkins Glen in New York. These 2 tracks would give NASCAR fans only a glimpse into what road racing was like, as the sport grew bigger than ever before while maintaining its left-turning roots. Speaking of which, why do NASCAR cars make left turns? Like many other mainstays of the sport, left turns are primarily for safety. Driver's side hits have proven more painful and dangerous to drivers, so naturally keep the drivers as far from the outside wall as possible. Obviously, this is nerfed when the series visits road courses because left and right turns are being made. NASCAR cars clearly weren't made for this type of racing originally. You're throwing a big blocky stock car that's twice the weight of a Formula 1 car on the same kind of track, but some people honestly like that style of racing more. Don't get me wrong. The aerodynamics are shit, the cars go a lot slower, and things can get a little, well, messy isn't quite the right word for it. That being said, it can provide for one hell of a show at tracks where strategy and precision normally dominate. Forever, Watkins Glen and Sonoma held their spots on the schedule with dignity, but also with the sense of a placeholder. Yes, it's fun to see lifelong short track drivers be uncomfortable on a 2+ mile road course, but it always felt more like the circus was coming to town than an actual Cup Series race. Through the 1990s, no one driver had found dominance at these tracks either, at least not like other tracks were dominated in the era. The best road racers at this point were Bobby Allison, the 1983 Cup champion who won at Riverside 6 times in 10 years, Rusty Wallace, the 1989 Cup champion who's just outside the top 10 all-time wins list, and Ricky Rudd, possibly the most successful journeyman in NASCAR history, with 23 career wins, 6 of them being on road courses. 6. The most anyone had been able to nab leading up to the 1990s was 6. That's not egregious, considering some tracks have been won by individual drivers 10+ times. It's only a matter of time before someone figures these things out, right? Enter Wonderboy. If there was anyone who was going to figure out turning right in the new age of NASCAR, it was Jeff Gordon. As a youngster in the 90s, Gordon lit the world on fire much like Earnhardt did the decade before him. While Earnhardt warped the world with his aggressive, brash racing style, Gordon would shape it with his unbelievable speed. It's likely why Earnhardt only ever netted 1 road course win compared to Gordon's 9. Turning winning lap times on the road requires precise timing, momentum, and a rhythm that is innately different from oval racing. And that's exactly the type of skill Jeff Gordon and the drivers after him brought to the table. You see, the rise of karting as a developmental form of racing began to inject road racing into the short track scene, as it became more and more common for young prospects to have some sort of background in road racing. At age 11, Gordon won all 25 karting races he entered, and that natural talent would show on track. Gordon would win his first championship in his third full-time season, in arguably the most star-studded era of the sport, and began a remarkable stretch of dominance where he won 6 straight road courses between Watkins Glen and Sonoma from 1997 to 2000. Gordon's dominance would only draw the ire of NASCAR's fanbase, and a yearning for a challenger, someone that could even come close to going toe-to-toe with the Rainbow Warrior, and that challenger would arrive in a cloud of smoke. Tony Stewart took a similar yet very different path to the Cup Series. Starting out on Indiana dirt tracks, Smoke would work his way all the way up to IndyCar in 1996, and despite only 3 wins to his name, he would take home the 1997 IndyCar Championship. After years of interest in part-time racing in the Busch Series, Stewart announced he would be moving to NASCAR full-time in 1999. The move was met with initial skepticism because, while Stewart was a huge talent, people were unsure as to how an open-wheel driver would perform in a stock car full-time. Stars like AJ Foyt and Mario Andretti had won NASCAR races before, but only on a part-time schedule in an era where competition was much lower, not full-time like Stewart was about to attempt with some of the greatest in the sport's history. The Rushville Rocket wouldn't win just once or twice in his first year, but 3 times, something Gordon couldn't even do once as a rookie. Stewart would immediately take the fight right to the 24 car, winning 8 road course races of his own, including one final triumph at Sonoma in 2016 for his last ever Cup win. Stewart's cavalier approach to road racing totally flipped what it took to win on these tracks. Road racing in NASCAR became partially synonymous with physicality and survival due to the general lack of experience amongst Cup regulars. While the field was getting better at road racing over time, the lack of road courses on the Cup schedule would limit opportunities to perfect one's craft. The slow progress of Cup drivers acclimating to right turns brought upon an age of part-timers, affectionately known as ringers. These road course aces would make starts for teams without full-time drivers just looking for prize money, entering in extra entries for a bigger team, or even substituting for Cup regulars should they fall ill. These ringers would start to put pressure on beloved fan favorites. Robbie Gordon would nab a pair of Cup wins in the early 2000s, while Ron Fellows remains the pioneer of the profession in the sport with 5 Xfinity wins. The more successful the ringers got, the more competitive teams took notice. Robbie Gordon was officially signed full-time to Richard Childress Racing in 2002, and Australian Supercars champion Marcos Ambrose and F1 winner Juan Pablo Montoya would migrate to the States in 2007 in pursuit of Cup glory. Montoya would even win Sonoma in his rookie year to solidify the start of the open-wheel invasion. This was a period with an unprecedented influx of drivers from other series trying their hands at left turns. And turns out, it's a little harder than people think, with only Ambrose, Montoya, and a resurging AJ Allmendinger scoring wins in the 2010s. By 2017, NASCAR had made its 5th change to the point system in 13 years, and with most of the kinks ironed out, their attention turned to the schedule. After years of regulars working on their road course skills, ringers faded into the background, though not to be forgotten. Drivers were putting on solid races every year, and people wanted more. 2018 would finally see the addition of a new road course, the Charlotte Roval, a hybrid between Charlotte Motor Speedway's oval and infield road course. For once, a welcome change to the schedule. The question is, can it put together a race deserving of a playoff date? At this point, the fan base was sold, and this would serve as the domino that would spur the change NASCAR would make going forward. COVID hit the sport hard, but it hit back harder, being the first major American sport to return to competition. Ironically, 2020 would be the first time in over 30 years that NASCAR didn't go to either Watkins Glen or Sonoma, but they would venture to the Daytona Roval as part of their Frankenstein schedule. Come 2021, NASCAR decided to shake up the schedule big time, with 7 road course races. 7. More than double of any season before it. The fans had been asking for more road courses for sure, but this felt cramped. Part of this was because the sport was still trying to innovate, but mostly due to the next generation of cars set to debut in 2022. The Gen 7 car made many noticeable changes to the cars we had grown accustomed to over the past 30 years. The rear suspension is now independent, meaning it'd turn better. The shifter is now straight up and down, not in the usual pattern. The tires only have one lug nut. They moved the fucking number. Okay, I'm getting carried away. The point is, these cars became easier for everyone to drive on road courses. While this was a good idea in theory, it made our road racing more akin to F1, which, no problem with that, I enjoy F1 too, but it's become too hard to pass because pretty much everybody is driving comfortably. Just reminds me of Syndrome.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
The advent of the Gen 7 would prove inviting once again for foreign drivers, with team owners even entering an extra car again specifically for them. The best chance for any of them to steal a win would be with Trackhouse Racing in the Project 91 car, created intentionally to be a landing spot for international racers. F1 champion Kimi Räikkönen would make a few promising starts in the car between 2022 and 23, but everything would change going into the first ever NASCAR street race in downtown Chicago. You see, the sport had been looking at taking a race to a downtown market, bring water to the horse sort of deal. IndyCar, F1, Supercars, and many more series have been doing it for decades, and NASCAR wanted in. We've already covered this. You already know the details of how we got here. Now let me introduce you to the main character. Kiwi Shane Van Gisbergen entered this race with potential to win, but not many really expected him to shine. His supercars background would probably help because of his street course history, and yes, these are very weird circumstances, so we don't really know what to expect, but come on, it's his first ever race. What are the odds this guy could just waltz in and steal the show? A guy whose name couldn't be pronounced by the broadcast booth went out and won in his first cup race in cinematic fashion. This race had so much more that I couldn't cover here, but in essence I've found why it was so successful. It wasn't the crashes, weather, or hell, even the venue. The reason this race went off so well was because it brought back everything that fans loved about road racing into one race. Drivers were uncomfortable, making mistakes, strategy played a huge role, the best drivers found themselves up front, and once again, a ringer stole the show. SVG has now moved to a full-time Xfinity Series ride with Cup aspirations, and has brought a lot of his supercars buddies over with him in a new age wave of foreign drivers. The Cup Series returns to Chicago in hopes of recapturing what magic they had last year. Will it last? Hard to tell, honestly. This has opened up a lot of doors for the sport to explore, and I hope they do. It's important to have a balanced schedule, and I think NASCAR's long effort to get there has largely paid off. The sport continues to evolve, and I look forward to seeing where it goes. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like down low to help support my channel, to support the Cup Series too. Appreciate your time, y'all, and until next time, pull those belts tight, raise hail, praise Dale, and happy racing.